God created us to be not only physical and mental, but also spiritual and emotional beings made in His image. We know that over time, we should mature into a deeper, more satisfying, more intimate relationship with Jesus. But we often forget about the emotional piece of who we are. Our emotions, when underdeveloped, can lead to greater immaturity in our spiritual health. But when we mature our emotions, it can propel us to a greater intimacy with God and a more meaningful life. Emotional health is a vital part of following Jesus. So let's take hold of that through this message series to develop emotionally healthy spirituality.
Well, how are y'all today? Okay, it's good to see everybody. Hey, we're going to be in week 3 of our Emotionally Healthy Spirituality series today. Again, if you want to turn to Matthew chapter 11, that's where we'll be. Matthew 11, verses 28 through 30. And if this is your first time with us or your 1,000th time, although I don't think we've been here for 1,000 times yet, but if you've been around for a while or if you're new, I want to say welcome to you. Thanks for being here, especially if you're here in person with us, but also if you're joining us online, thanks for worshiping with us today. Hey, before we get into the message series, though, I do want to just highlight that we had a starting point this past weekend. We had 5 people in starting point, which was really awesome this weekend. And then we had 2 people in the starting point that we kind of had a pre-starting point 2 weeks ago, representing a family of 4 the weekend before. So we've had 7 people go through starting point over the last 2 weeks, and that's just really awesome for us. Starting point is your way into Redemption Church. You can go from connected to committed. That's kind of how we like to talk about it there, and you can learn more about who we are and what we're about, how you fit into the mission with us, and how you can even become a member with us. Membership is something that we do here. We practice that. You don't have to be a member that you're here if you're not a member. We're thankful that you're here. But we do practice membership for those who do want to take that extra step of commitment, because in the New Testament, especially in Acts, we see believers committing to one another. That's what they do throughout the book of Acts. They're committing to one another, they're sharing everything together, and then they're meeting together on a regular, usually weekly, sometimes daily basis. And so that's what that is in our context. Membership is that for us. It's just committing to one another. That's really what it boils down to for us. If you want to learn more about that and you think that's a step that you want to take, you've been around for a little bit and you're starting to get the feel for our church, then I would love for you to come to our next starting point, which is on Friday, October 28th and Sunday, October 30th. So you can mark those down in your calendar. If you want to come to those, you can jump on our website and sign up for them. More about that later. But man, I just wanted to give you an update on that because that's important for us. And I want to let you know that 4 people have become members recently in the last 2 weeks. So that's really cool too. We want to start making sure that, thank you. We can celebrate that. Yes, that's great. That's great. So we know 4 people have committed to us and we have committed to them as a church. And so we're pumped about more people on mission with us. I know people get a little squirrely when we start talking about numbers, right? We came as a team of 21 people, and now that means that with those people joining, we have over 80 members in our church now, and that's awesome for us. And you're like, man, don't start talking about the numbers, but I say this all the time, and I really mean it. Numbers are people, right? And people are the mission. And so we want every member that joins us here to be on mission with us. So while numbers aren't the goal, they're not the end goal, numbers are people, and people are the end goal. And so we're really thankful for the people who have joined with us in the mission here today. So, okay, anymore. I can talk about that all day because I get really pumped about that. But hey, let's go into our topic for today. We're talking about embracing our limits, okay? Now, if you haven't been here for the last 2 weeks, I would highly encourage you to go back and listen to the sermons. They do build on one another, and I don't want to rehash everything today, but let me just give you a little bit of an overview. The first week in the series, we discussed what emotionally healthy spirituality is. That corresponds with chapters 1 and 2 in the book Emotionally Healthy Spirituality by Peter Scazzero. And so we talked about that. What does it look like to be your authentic self? Well, we learned that it's who God says you are. That's your authentic self. And then last week we talked about letting go of all the emotional baggage that we tend to carry with us so that we can embrace a new life in Jesus that He has purchased for us on our behalf. And if His love controls us, then our emotions won't. And that corresponds with chapters 3 and 4 in the book loosely. And then this week we're going to talk about chapters 5 and 6. That's where we're going to be in that Emotionally Healthy Spirituality book today. It's going to correspond with that. But this week builds on that concept further of letting go of your past. Okay, because we're talking about embracing our limits. We all have natural limits, right? And what I want to do is get hyper practical for you guys today. So we've kind of talked a little bit theoretically, how we should think, how we're feeling, those kinds of things. And that's all good in the first 2 messages here. But I want to get really practical. I'm going to ask some very pointed questions today. I want you guys taking notes if you do note taking. If not, if you like to think a little bit more like I do, then man, really chew on some of the things today and come away with a very practical step. Because when we embrace our limits, it will push us to something called rest. You guys ever heard of that before? I know. It's kind of hard in our culture today. But we're going to talk about rest because, see, we have to come to the end of ourselves in order to see that we need rest in the first place. So embracing our limits is going to lead to rest. Now, I know from personal experience, we don't like having limits, do we? And maybe it's just me. Because it means we're not actually in control of everything in our lives like we want to be. You know, we're not omniscient, so we don't know everything. We're not omnipotent, so we're not all-powerful and can control everything the way we want to. We're not omnipresent, so we can't be everywhere at once. And we hate that. Our natural desire is to be our own God. We want to be in control. We want to manage our lives. But man, thank God that our limits remind us on a daily basis that we're not God. Limits are good for us. The foremost limit that I think might remind us of this is that we need sleep. You know, in our prayer rally today, the guy who led it, Matt Wagner, he said it very well. When we're tired, we gotta go to sleep. We gotta go to bed. You know, that's a limit that we have. We all have to sleep because our bodies need to repair themselves, right? We need to rest in order to be healthy. And when you go without sleep for an extended period of time or no sleep at all, man, that's going to lead to some very bad health issues for you, physically for sure. But this is what's interesting. It can also lead to psychological and emotional health issues for you without sleep. Because people without sleep, they can start to hallucinate. They can start to experience paranoia. They can black out, and among other things that can happen. Their bodies are starting to shut down. They need sleep to function, and it affects how we feel and how we think. Man, that's a limit that we all have, and that we have to accept. We have to have sleep, right? So we've all kind of accepted that. If you went to bed last night, you've accepted that limit. Good step. Good step for you in this sermon today. But it also shows that we have a deeper need for rest as well, you know? We have a deeper need for a rest that's not just physical. We need to remain healthy in other ways. I mean, physical rest is important, but if we're to ask the question today, are you weary? In a deeper way, not just in a physical way, not just physical tired, but are you weary in a soul kind of way, like in a deep kind of tiredness within you? And you don't have to raise your hand, but man, how many of you would say yes to that if I asked that question to you? If I said, man, are you weary today? How many of us would say yes? I would dare say probably most of us in the room, if not all of us, would say that in some way, shape, or form, for one reason or another. We're a tired society. America is in a hurry at all times. And we get weary all the time because we have expectations, we have things that we want to do, we have dreams that we have to accomplish, we have career goals, we have all of these things, and we're weary. We're weary from the expectations that we feel like others have placed on us. We're weary of the suffering that we see or experience in our world. We're weary of the turmoil that we've seen in our culture over the last 5 years in a way that our generation has not seen that. We're weary of our own sins and imperfections that seem to mock us on a daily basis when we can't overcome them, and they just keep coming back up over and over and over again. We can't get rid of them. We're weary of all that. We get weary, right? We're tired. Maybe some of you guys are even weary of ministry to others. You know, you haven't been able to live on mission in your life the way that you would maybe want to or know that God has called us to because you're just tired, man. You're just tired. Maybe you're not seeing life change in the people you are discipling, and you're weary, or you're getting stuck in the grind of daily life, and so you don't make margin to actually serve and love other people and to engage them in their life. Things aren't the way you thought they'd be in your ministry, or whatever it might be. I don't know, maybe you're getting weary today. What we're going to see is that all who are weary, all who carry heavy burdens, can go to Jesus for rest. That's what Matthew 11 is going to teach us. And that's our main point for today. If you're taking notes, you want to write this down. Go to Jesus for rest. Go to Jesus for rest. And that's tough when we constantly wrestle with wanting to be our own God. You know, I mean, if that's really where we're at all the time, we don't want to embrace our limits, it's going to be hard for us to go to Jesus for rest. Me saying that is one thing, and then you doing it is a totally different thing, right? Go to Jesus for rest. But see, if we can learn to get in that process of putting on the new nature that we talked about last week, it's a process, it's a position that God has called us into, but it's also a process that we have to kind of start to walk into and practice. If we can get in that process and go to Jesus over and over and over again, then he will give us rest. And yes, we do have to reach our limits in that. Part of the process is learning our limits and embracing our limits, but that's kind of the point. We kind of have to realize what our limits are. Jesus will continue to carry us through that. He wants us to reach the end of ourselves so that he can give us rest and he can start to shape us and mold us into that new nature. So embracing our limits is good, because it's really through our weakness that Jesus' strength can be magnified in our lives. So let's go ahead and read this text together. We're going to talk about it. And like I said, I want you to walk away with some very practical, hyper-practical steps, at least one big one that I think you can take this week that you're probably not doing. I don't know. I'll be interested to talk to you afterward and see if you really are doing what the practical step is. But most of us probably aren't very well. We need to start doing it, so I won't give it away yet, okay? I'm going to build the suspense there. But let's go to Matthew chapter 11, verse 28, and this is what it says. Jesus said, "Come to me, all of you who are weary and carry heavy burdens, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you. Let me teach you, because I'm humble and gentle at heart." Some translations say lowly and gentle at heart, gentle and lowly. And you'll find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy to bear, and the burden that I give to you is light. So what's the context of this particular passage here? Well, man, I'm going to probably come back to it later on in Matthew's gospel, maybe sometime next year when we get back into Matthew. Let me just, for now, give you a quick overview of this section. We studied Matthew chapters 1 through 7 last fall and into Christmas, the Christmas season. So we saw Jesus' birth and the beginning of his ministry in Matthew 1 through 7. And now, once you get into chapters 8 through 12, you really see Jesus start to take on that role of Messiah. He's become the Savior here. He's starting to reveal himself through the miracles and through his teachings. You're going to see that here. He's performing miracles to show his power and reveal the coming kingdom. And he's sending his disciples out into the world to start sharing the gospel and the good news about who he is. And he's starting to face some opposition from some of the Jewish leaders here. You know, I mean, religious leaders, man, they're the worst sometimes, right? Religion can be hard. And so Jesus is going to take some flack for saying and talking like this about rest and about coming to him. But the invitation that he gives here is probably, if it's arguably, one of the most comforting places in the Bible for all of us, right? It can be one of the most helpful things in the entire Bible because it not only provides us with hope, but it teaches us who Jesus is at his very core. Right? That's why he took flack for it, because he was identifying himself as the God who could give rest. He was saying, I'm the only way that you can have rest. You got to come to me. Maybe you've heard of the book Gentle and Lowly by Dane Ortland. If you haven't, man, I'd highly recommend you write that down and go read it, because the whole premise is to reteach us who Jesus is to us. You know, and at his core, Jesus is gentle and lowly. That's the title of the book. I mean, yeah, I gave it away for you, but that's what it is. Gentle and lowly. Lowly means meek or humble. He's not proud and arrogant. That's not who Jesus is. He's not overbearing or burdensome to you. He's not legalistic and angry about it. He's not frustrated and impatient with you. And he's gentle. He's humble. He expresses that here when he tells us to come to him for rest. He's saying, I'm safe. I'm a safe place. You can come to me. And isn't that comforting for us? To know that you can go to Jesus just as you are, and he'll come to you and give you comfort, and he'll give you rest. Man, he's not going to give you the side eye, right? He's not going to kind of look at you like that. He's going to make you feel like an outsider and hold you at arm's length until he makes sure that you're doing what you're supposed to do or that he can trust you or whatever it is. Man, he immediately takes you in. He immediately brings you in. And that's what's restful to us. Like, we don't have to try to be somebody that we're not. We don't have to try to be something else in order to have Jesus accept us. He accepts us as we are. And that's what hospitality feels like, doesn't it? It's one of our core values here as a church. That's true hospitality, is bringing the stranger in. It's not like Southern hospitality, is it? You guys know what I'm talking about. We're in Roanoke, Virginia. There's Southern hospitality all over the place. You guys know what Southern hospitality is, right? Okay, it has the word hospitality in it, but it's not really like hospitality, okay? Because in Southern hospitality, there are expectations, right? There are kind of like unspoken rules that you got to follow, you know? And when you're the one hosting in Southern hospitality, the show is really about you, isn't it? It's not really for the person that you're supposed to be hosting and being hospitable to. It's really so that you can put a display on and you can make people feel a certain way and have a certain experience. And there's big expectations on you, but on them and all of these different things. And it can be very off-putting to some people. It can be very disingenuous, you know. In those moments, you kind of like get a smile when you're facing that person, but then when you turn around, you get an eye roll behind your back kind of thing. That's Southern hospitality, right? Bless their hearts, you know? Man, I mean, that's what we are. That's the culture that we swim in sometimes. But that's not true hospitality, is it? The kind of hospitality that Jesus shows to us, he exhibits this welcoming, this warmth, no expectations for you. I mean, you got to start to deconstruct that in your mind if you have that view of Jesus. There's no expectations. There's no reciprocation that he feels like he needs from you in order to bring you in and give you rest. That's what's restful about it. That's what makes it restful. So we know that he'll accept us. Open arms. That's the call. Come to him. Man, I'm sure you can think of someone that you can just be yourself around, right? Somebody that you don't have to worry about what they're going to think of you. Somebody you don't have to, be afraid that they're going to roll their eyes at you. Somebody that is your true friend. Somebody that is truly hospitable to you. That's what Jesus is times 1,000 for us. He's that and more. That's the picture of Jesus we need to have in our mind. Man, he wants us to come to him. It's a good picture of rest that Jesus offers. So what I want to do is I want to break down these verses here into 3 sections for us, okay? And they're based off of commands that Jesus gives. I don't know if you caught that. He actually commands things in this passage. Did you notice that? These are Jesus' commands. I know we think of commands in a different way, don't we? We're like, man, we got to do this, we got to do that, we got to do this. He commands 3 things here. One's implicit, and then 2 are very explicit commands. These are the commands that Christianity puts on you. These are the commands that Jesus puts on you. These are what they are. You can use an acronym, ACT, A-C-T, to remember these. Admit, come, and take. Those are the commands, okay? So let's go through these. First is admit. Admit your limits. So this is the implicit command, right? Because he doesn't specifically say that, but it's implied. When you have to come to him and give him your burdens, you've got to admit that you have burdens. You see, you got to admit that you have limitations. So there's an implicit command here. Come to me. Admit that you have a need. Admit your limits. And if we learn to do this, which we can call this embracing our limits, which is what I've said so far, it's going to lead to emotional and spiritual health. These are in part the burdens that we carry, or at least burdens maybe are a result of our limits. We have to admit that we're burdened. We have to admit that we're weary. And I said in the intro, this is something we all hate, right? This is the hard part. We don't like to admit that we have a need. We don't like to admit that we have burdens that we're carrying. Each of us is experiencing some kind of heaviness in our life right now. Whether it's self-inflicted or whether it's inflicted from someone else, you're carrying some kind of weight. Jesus wants to take that off your shoulders. But we have to recognize that we have limits here, that we can't carry the burden ourselves. Maybe these things, maybe these burdens that you carry are expectations from your parents. Maybe it's an anxiety problem that you have, that when you get around other people or you're seeing things going on in the world right now, you get anxious and it gets paralyzing. Maybe it's being a minority in a mostly white context. Maybe that's the burden that you're carrying right now. Maybe it's being treated less than by someone else. Or maybe it's something else. I don't know what your burdens are. They're burdens that you bear. And what you need to do is be careful not to compare yourself and your burdens to somebody else, right? Because you start comparing, you're like, well, their burdens are I have it so much easier than a lot of people out there. And yeah, maybe you do, but they're still your burdens. These are the burdens, the weight that you experience. Nobody else knows the burden that you carry. Or you don't want to start getting in the other direction where you're like, man, my burdens are worse than everybody else's. I'm the victim here. You don't want to get in that way either. You don't want to start comparing either way. You want to just recognize you have a weight. Realize that. It's your weight. God knows what that is with you. So you need to recognize the burdens that you have. You can imagine the word picture Jesus paints here in this. It's evoking a picture of somebody with the weight of the world on their shoulders. You can just feel the weight. It's like the Greek god of mythology, Atlas. Have you seen the statue maybe of Atlas holding the world on his shoulders, you know? It's that feeling of just carrying everything. You got to carry the world on your shoulders. Or it's like the yoke that he talks about. That's the picture that he uses. It's a yoke. You guys know what a yoke is. A yoke is this wooden apparatus that you put on a beast of burden so they can carry a plow, they can pull a plow, or they can pull a carriage or something like that. It's heavy. It's burdensome. It's hard. So here's a question. You can write this down. What are some of your burdens? Man, you need to wrestle with that this week. What are some of those weights that you carry? Again, you're not trying to be a victim here. You're trying to recognize what those weights are in your life, because we all carry something. Maybe there's some kind of emotional baggage that we mentioned last week. Yeah, maybe it's some expectations that you have for others or for yourself, or you believe others have for you. Maybe it's the worries in this world you see. Maybe it's maybe the threat of nuclear war really gets to you. I mean, I don't know, that's going on over in the other side of the world right now with Ukraine and Russia. Maybe that's really making you anxious. I don't know what your burden is. Maybe there's something else personal to you. Recognize what some of your burdens are. Write those down. Think about them. And then we need to try to come to terms with the fact that we're limited to deal with those burdens, right? You don't have everything that you need in order to carry that weight by yourself. You need help. You need help. You can't do that all on your own. It will destroy you eventually. Oftentimes, the burdens that we bear come from some of our limits. That might be things that we can't even control. Maybe our limits. Maybe our limits are just natural to us. I mean, Scazzero in chapter 5 gives a list of limits that we all have. We can't control them. They're just limits that we have as human beings and who we are. I'll list off a few that he says. Our physical body, right? We all said we need sleep. We're limited physically. We can't fly. We don't have super strength. We're limited physically, right? Our family of origin is a limit for us. Our parents, our ethnicity, our culture, our country of birth, all of those come with some kind of limitation. Our marital status, both singleness and marriage are limits in some way, shape, or form, especially when you have kids, okay? Kids are a big limit, okay? I love kids, but they're a limit. They just are. You have to give more of yourself to that. Our intellectual capacity, our talents and our giftings, our material wealth, our personality and our temperament, our time, right? Time is a limit for all of us. Our work, our other relationships that we have are limitations. Our spiritual maturity is a limitation for us. We're not all there yet. We haven't all arrived, right? These are all limitations that we can't control. They just are on our lives. Some of us right now, though, might not be emotionally healthy enough to even realize that we have some of those limitations or to realize how those limitations are affecting us. We can't even admit them because we don't or won't see them, much less the burdens on our back that we don't even want to deal with. Just keep grinding and grinding away because we won't admit our limits. Maybe you've been working so hard, Maybe you've been making yourself busy. Maybe you've been filling your mind with so much content. I mean, good grief, social media, entertainment, binge watching TV shows, movies, podcasts. You've always got noise in your ear, right? Man, you're so weary and so burdened, you don't even see it. You're barely making it every day. It's a grind for you. Just so you know, that's called burnout, if that's where you're at. Man, if you don't feel like you can make it one more day, or you're just dragging your feet every single day, it's a chore, it's a grind. Man, that's called burnout, and that's what happens when you don't see your limits until it's too late. If you don't start to deal with your limits, it's going to be detrimental to you. You try to take on more than you can handle in your life, or more than you can handle is forced on you. And that way it will crush you without you even realizing it, perhaps. There are lots of signs of burnout. The foremost is cynicism. You get really negative about everything. There's fatigue, though. There's a lack of energy. You have trouble sleeping, but you're tired all the time, right? And all those things can be signs. You can just look it up on the internet. There's like 1,000 signs of burnout, but you can see for yourself. One major one is that you become much more unpleasant to be around. Just being real here, okay? Burnout changes your brain chemistry. I read an Inc.com article a few weeks ago that said your amygdala, the part of your brain that essentially acts like an alarm system for self-preservation. So it's that part of your brain that maybe causes you to panic when something bad goes wrong. Okay, so like last night, I'm just talking about rest here. It's great. It's just very interesting. I woke up to this sound like that. It sounded like a gunshot going off in our house. My wife had put a balloon arch up because she had a little bit of a gathering, a little baby shower for some of the people in our group and stuff. And the balloon arch was up. And I mean, it was like 2:30. I don't remember what time it was. But man, I heard that like that. And my feet hit the floor. I was awake, okay? I was like, what is that? I said that, sat up last night. And Tamara rolled over and she was like, it's just a balloon. Just go back to sleep, right? Just go back to sleep. Okay, well, an hour later, I'm still like, my amygdala was on fire, okay? I'm like, panic mode, right? That's what the amygdala does for us. And when you're in burnout mode, that part of your brain just doesn't shut off. You're in panic mode all the time. Something's always wrong. Everything's on fire, right? That's burnout for you. And if that's where you're at, man, you're on edge about everything and you're not very pleasant to be around. I hope you have somebody in your life that can tell you that in a gentle and loving way. They can say, hey, listen, I think something's wrong. I think you need to rest. I think you need to take a break. Something's going on. You need to do something radical. Because you stop being effective in your work when you burn out. John Mark Comer points out in his book, The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry, which I would also highly recommend if you haven't read that. Put it on your list and read it soon. But he said that one study found that people who logged 70 hours of work in a week, which is a lot of work, had zero difference in productivity to the people that worked 55 hours in a week, which is also still a lot, right? A normal work week is 40 hours. 55 hours is still over that. Zero difference in their productivity. The people who were trying to work more, they were spinning their wheels, right? It's like we just naturally can't take on more work than we can handle. It's like we have a natural stop there, right, of being productive because we're limited. We have limitations. Scazzero, in his book, Emotionally Healthy Spirituality, shares some common defenses that we often use when we're confronted with our limits in this way. Instead of admitting them, we kind of do things like deny our limits. We just ignore them. We don't have a limit there. That's not a limit. We don't acknowledge them, or we try to put on a brave face and muscle through and suck it up and don't tell anybody else about it. Don't try to get any help for it while we're slowly dying inside and it's just grinding away at us. Or we can minimize our limits and try to rationalize them away. We're like, yeah, I know something's wrong, but it's not that bad, right? So we'll try to make it seem less serious than it actually is in appearance. We'll make excuses, and it's not the limitations that we have. It couldn't be that, or the limitation. Yeah, I've got a limitation, but it's not that big of a deal. Or we'll blame others for we'll just, instead of denying it or minimizing it, we'll just blame other people. Man, that's their fault. It's not my limitation. It's them. They're the problem. Or we shame ourselves in that. We do the opposite. We blame ourselves here and don't accept our limits, but we regret them. Yeah, I'm just a horrible person. And it's just all me. I'm never going to change. I'm never going to be anything. I'm terrible. So we shame ourselves, or we intellectualize, analyze, theorize, and use generalities so that we don't actually have to accept that there are limits, but they're just they're just people's limits. It's just limitations. It's not me. It's not my problem. It's not something that I need to admit. It's just everybody, right? It's a generality. Or we distract from our limits. So we just try to change the subject. Somebody brings it up with us in a loving way. We just, yeah, but hey, did you see the game last night? Right? We just try to distract, whatever it is. Change the subject. Use humor. Try to look on the bright side. Make light of it. Make light of the consequences even. Or maybe this is the most prominent one. We just become outright hostile. I don't have limits, and I'm not going to have limits. And we get angry and irritable, and certain things get brought up that highlight the limits that we have, and we don't want to deal with it, so we just get angry instead of admitting it. Man, we often fail to admit our limits because we either don't realize them or we don't want to realize them. But either way, these are burdens that we're carrying. They lead to burdens that we carry. And when we see them, Jesus commands us to do something explicitly now. He commands us to come to him. And that's the second thing you can write down that he says here in the text. Come to Jesus. He's the only one that can give us rest. That's his offer to you today. When you go to him, he'll start showing you your limits in a gentle and humble. That's what he said. He's gentle and lowly. He will begin to show you your limits in a way that confronts you, and it's not comfortable, but that you can see is safe. He loves you. He doesn't rub your nose in it or look down on you for being limited. Man, his invitation to come is precisely because you're limited, right? That's the whole point. And he'll bring other people around you that he can speak through to help you see those limitations, which is why we need community. We talked about that on the first week of this. We need to be around other people who can help us see our limitations. And he'll use your circumstances in your life to show you your limits. We talked about pain last week, didn't we? How pain can be very hard, but God can use that to remind us of and show us our limits so that we'll trust him. That's why we got to be honest when they come up. All of these things can and should drive us back to Jesus, because you can only rest if you go to him with all of these burdens. Nothing can alleviate your pain or your limitations. Nothing can turn restlessness into restfulness or satisfy the desire that you have for rest and acceptance except for knowing Jesus. Only he can give you that rest. And he's saying, come to me. So go to him today. In What Jesus Demands of the World, which is a book, retired pastor John Piper writes this: Jesus did not come into the world mainly to bring a new religion or a new law. He came to offer himself for our eternal enjoyment and to do whatever he had to do, including death, to remove every obstacle to this everlasting joy in him. Do you think of Jesus that way? True rest and joy can only be found in him. Why? Because he is the way to eternal rest and joy. John 4:16, right? Jesus is the way, he's the truth, he's the life. We can only get to God through him, and God, knowing him, being known by him, is the only way we can have true rest. And the problem is we all have this one burden that we all bear that is a limitation for us, and it's a burden, it's a weight on our shoulders, and it's the sin that we have that separates us from God. I think we can make an argument that any burden that we bear, any weight that holds us down, is probably as a result of our sin. And we talk about this all the time, but our sin is rejecting God, right? It's rejecting him. We all have this tendency. We all want to be our own God. I said that already. We don't like to admit our limitations. That's rejecting God in his way. But the beautiful thing is, God enters in. I mean, it makes sense if you think about it, though. It makes sense that when we reject the God of rest, we will be restless, right? And if we're experiencing restlessness, that probably means and shows us a warning sign that we're not resting super well. If God really is the only one that's the true source of rest and life, and when we reject his authority, it naturally leads us to restlessness and death. And that's the weight that we all carry of sin. But see, Jesus, what he has done is he has taken that weight onto himself, right? He swallows all of that up with his perfect life of rest in God. And then his death in our place. And then his resurrection on our behalf. Jesus takes the burden of sin off of us and puts it onto himself. So you can write that down and remember that this week. He takes the weight. You don't have to bear it anymore. I want to give you something that I think is really awesome. John, I know I'm full of like all of these resources this week. Write them all down. Read them. They're all great, okay? John Bunyan's book, The Pilgrim's Progress, which I did mention last week a little bit. But this happens to the main character whose name is Christian, because it's an allegory, okay? It's an allegory about walking through life as a Jesus follower from lost to saved to heaven. And Christian, the main character, is carrying along this heavy burden on his back. That's this massive pack, and it's sin. It's the sin that separates him from God and would keep him from running toward the celestial city. Okay, that's the end goal for them in this book. And the pack is just getting so heavy as he walks along that he can't hardly carry it on his own, because it just keeps getting heavier and heavier. And the shame, the guilt, the frustration, all of it just keeps piling on. And the narrator who's telling the story says this, and I'm going to quote it at length, but I think it's really good. Listen to this. Now I saw in my dream that the highway up which Christian was to go was fenced on either side with a wall. And that wall was called, get this, salvation. Up this way, so it's the narrow way. It's pointing him in the direction that he should go. And up this way, therefore, did burdened Christian run. He ran. He didn't walk. He didn't crawl. He ran. But not without great difficulty. I think that's very interesting because of the load that was on his back, the sin that he carried with him. And he ran thus till he came at a place somewhat ascending, and upon that place stood a cross. And a little below, at the bottom of the cross, a sepulcher. Okay, now for us modern folk, a sepulcher is a tomb. Okay, it's where you would put a dead body. It's like carved out of a rock. It's a tomb like that. It's a sepulcher. So I saw in my dream that just as Christian came up with the cross, his burden loosed off of his shoulders and fell off of his back and began to tumble, and so continued to do till it came to the mouth of the sepulcher, where it fell in, and I saw it no more. And then was Christian glad and lightsome, and said with a merry heart, He hath given me rest by his sorrow, and life by his death. And then he stood a while to look and wonder. For it was very surprising to him that just the sight of the cross should thus ease him of his burden. He just looked at it and it fell off. What a beautiful picture of the gospel for us. He looked therefore and looked again. It's like he couldn't look away, even till the springs that were in his head sent the waters down his cheeks. And now as he stood looking and weeping, behold, 3 shining ones came to him and saluted him with peace be to thee. And so the first one said to him, Thy sins be forgiven thee. And the second one stripped him of his rags and clothed him with a change of raiment, the new nature that we talked about last week. And the third also set a mark on his forehead that's talked about in Revelation and gave him a roll with a seal upon it from Ephesians chapter 1, the seal of the Holy Spirit, and bade him to look at that seal as he ran on, that he should give it to the celestial city gate. And so they went their way, and then Christian gave 3 leaps of joy and went on, singing this, Thus far I did come laden with my sin, nor could aught ease the grief that I was in till I came hither. What a place is this! Must here be the beginning of my bliss? Must here the burden fall from off my back? Must here the strings that bound it to me crack? Blessed cross, blessed sepulcher, blessed rather be the man that there was put to shame for me. Man, do you trust that man today? Do you trust that Jesus' life and death and resurrection will take that burden off of your back? Do you trust that you don't have to feel the shame and the guilt that you so often feel with your sin? To admit your limits? Do you trust him to give you rest? Let him slip the weight off of your shoulders today. Let him swallow it up into himself. That's what he did for you. He died for that. Because once you do, his yoke is easy and his burden is light. And that's the last command here that's explicit. We need to admit, we need to come, and we need to take. Take his yoke. Take his yoke on you. That's the beauty of the gospel for us. It's interesting that he doesn't stop at come to me and I will give you rest. All we have to do is come to him, right? That's not it. There's this last command here. He's going to give us a burden himself. It's his burden. Do you notice that? He's going to give us a weight to carry, but it's a weight that's light. Hey, this is the paradox of the Christian life. It's an oxymoron here, right? It's a weight that is easy for us to carry. It's a burden, but it's a light burden. It's a life-giving burden. It's not going to weigh us down. It's actually going to lift us up. Pastor H.B. Charles preached on this passage from Matthew 11, and he got to verse 29 here about the yoke. And he said this, in verse 29, Jesus commands us to put on his yoke. This is no bait and switch scheme, okay? It's a proper understanding of the nature of rest. True rest is not freedom from responsibility. Rest is to be bound to that duty for which you were created. It's a tree free when the wind uproots it from its base of nourishment. Is a tree free when the wind uproots it from its base of nourishment in the soil? Does that really make a tree free? Is a fish free when the fisherman's hook reels it out of the confines of its water? No. Is a train free when it derails and travels to outside of the direction of the tracks? Of course not. See, we have to be free within the bounds that God has given us in his creation. Augustine, the church father, said, if you take a bird's wings away, you might seem to be taking weight off of it. But the more weight you take off, the more you tie it down to the earth, right? There it is on the ground, and you wanted to relieve it of its weight, but give it back the weight of its wings, and you'll see how it flies. Man, rest is knowing who you are in Christ, being controlled by his love for you, and taking all of your limits to him so that you can live in a way that he's created for you to be your authentic self that we talked about 2 weeks ago. Here's a good definition for us if you need this. Rest is stopping and delighting in what Jesus has done for you. That's what rest is. That's what true rest is. Stop and delight in what Jesus has done for you. Just think about the concept of rest in the Bible. That's the whole idea behind the seventh day of rest that God gives us in Genesis chapter 2. We always tend to look at the 6 days of creation with the seventh day of rest, kind of like it's weird, like, man, God rested because he worked hard or something like that. You know, creating the world was hard, so God had to rest on the seventh day. That's not it, okay? That's not why that's there. God's all powerful. He doesn't need rest. Okay, Psalm 121 says he never sleeps, he never slumbers. So why does it say he rested? Why did he take a break and rest and stop? Well, it's not just for us to follow as an example either. I know a lot of people say that that's the reason, and I think it's one of the reasons. He didn't just say, I'm not limited, but they are, so I'm going to give him an example for rest. That's not it. Although I think it does get closer to the reason, but this is the reason, okay? The reason that he gives the seventh day of rest is because he stops and he delights in everything that he made. That's why he rests. He wants to take in. He wants to delight. He stops from what he was doing and he rests. He delights in everything that he's created. And now, through Jesus, he's inviting us into that stopping and delighting in him, with him, in his creation, in him. Jesus makes that possible for us. That's what the gospel does for us. We can enter into God's rest. I talk about that more in last year's sermon on Jesus talking about the Sabbath, so you can go back there and listen to that, or all the way to the beginning on the Ten Commandments, so you can look that back up, and we talked about the Ten Commandments about 2 years ago now. But man, we have to recognize that's the rest that we are invited into, is the rest. If you look at the days, the 6 days, they all have a beginning and an end, literal or not. We've had that conversation, okay? Whether they're literal or not days, they have the beginning and the end. And then the seventh day has this beginning, and then God stops and he rests. He delights in everything he's made, and that day has no end. If you go back and read the beginning of chapter 2 of Genesis, there's no end to that day. It has no end. His rest is what he's inviting us into. One could argue that when he creates the humans, it's so they can enter that rest with him. Because the very next thing is Genesis chapter 2, they're in the garden. And they're worshiping God in his rest. That's what he's created us for. And Jesus makes that possible. He's made it possible for you to stop. Stop worrying about what you've done or what you haven't done. Stop worrying about your situation or the circumstances you're in. Stop worrying about your job or your children. Stop putting your hope in things that don't ultimately lead to hope. Stop trying to enjoy things that don't ultimately lead to joy. Just stop. Stop bearing all those burdens and delight in what God has done for you, and then enjoy his creation in the way that he's intended. And let me give you an application point. I could make a ton here. We're winding down our time. I'll try not to go for an hour like I did last week, okay? Full confession, if you were new and you weren't here last week, we talked for an hour. I'm trying, okay? There's a lot of content. I hope you don't lose this, though, because this is the step. I'm going to give you one, and I think this is the secret sauce, okay? I think this is what it is here, to learning to rest in Christ, to learning what it is to rest in God, to find full satisfaction. This is it. And this is what he says in Exodus chapter 20, the fourth commandment. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. You're to labor 6 days and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord, your God. You must not do any work. You, your son, your daughter, your male or female servant, your livestock, or the resident alien who is within your city gates. For the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and everything in them in 6 days, and then he rested on the seventh day. Therefore, the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and declared it holy. Now, without going too deep into it, I don't want to give a full theology here, but let's just suffice it to say that rest is a command from God. And we talked about how this works with the Ten Commandments and that, Jesus doesn't come to abolish them. He comes to fulfill them and to clarify them for us. And how the rest is not a command that we just do away with. This is what we're created for. This is part of the character and nature of God and the character and nature of us as humans. He commands us to rest. That's what Jesus is saying. He's saying, come to me, rest. He's commanding us to take his yoke to rest. I'm going to ask you to go back to last year's Sermon on the Mount if you want to learn more about that. I already did that. But we might have thought this command was observing a day, right? Maybe we thought this command was about just observing one Saturday. Saturday is the day, or Sunday. We got to observe Sunday. That's what the command is about. But it's not, is it? It's about being known by God and knowing him deeply. That's what rest is. That's what we're talking about here. That's what Jesus is talking about. And it says here in Exodus 20, verse 11, the day is blessed, which means it's for our good. It's blessed so that it's good for us. That's what blessed means. It's for our joy. It's for our happiness. It's for our good. And it's declared holy, which means it's set apart. It's something we actually have to practice. It's a rhythm that we ought to get in our lives. That's what holy does for us. We set it apart and say, yes, I'm going to try to practice that in my life. So in one sense, we should be Sabbathing every day, right? Because we're resting and we're coming to him. We're resting in him every single day. That's what Paul says about praying at all times on every occasion, the power of the Holy Spirit in Ephesians 6:18, right? That's what it should look like for us Sabbathing at some level. We should Sabbath every day, all the time. We're resting in him every moment of every day. But it also does mean that we need a rhythm of life, where that includes a daily rest, and probably even a weekly rest, and then probably even a yearly rest or more. So I don't think God's commanding a specific day that we have to observe here, but he's talking about the normal rhythm of your life. It's blessed for you, and it's set apart for you. So rest. That's his command. Rest. Man, his command isn't do this, don't do that. His command isn't you got to be this way, you can't be this way. His command is to rest. Man, stop. Stop what you're doing and rest. And the Sabbath is that day that we can take one day a week to do that. Again, I think that's the secret sauce. We might balk at that and say, I don't have to take a day. That's religious. No, it's blessed for you. The word translated Sabbath is the Hebrew Shabbat, which literally means to stop. Stop. And there's also this connotation of delight or joy, enjoying something here too. So that helps us determine what rest actually should be. Again, in The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry by John Mark Comer, he has a chapter dedicated to the Sabbath. And he says it's not just another day off for us. It's not just a day that we get caught up on our housework or that we run errands or something like that. It's a day for rest and for worship. And so that's the last thing you can write down here if you're taking notes. Sabbath is for rest and for worship. That's the filter that we can use here. The two big filters for how we can practice this in our weekly lives. Sabbath is for rest and for worship. This is Jesus' burden for us. This is his yoke, and it leads to rest. We work 6 days, we rest 1. This is the rhythm of a Christian's life, because it weekly admits that we have limits, right? We have to say, I have a limit, I've got to stop. I've got to rest. Think about how different that is than the rest of the world. You know, the rest of the world is going to keep on working in some way, shape, or form. They say they stop, but they don't. We have devices in our pockets that say we can check our email anytime we want. We can think about, we're thinking about our work all the time. We got to go into the office just for a minute. I know what that's like, believe me. Ministry is not easy if you want to do it really well, you know. You're on all the time, so I get that. But God commands us to stop and delight in his creation. At least one day a week, we should do this. You know, in our context, if you want some super practical advice here, that probably means taking Saturday or Sunday. So for us, we take Saturdays because this is a work day for me. I'm going to work today. I'm going to work after this a little bit. You know, this is my work day. For you, maybe this is the day because you're here, you can worship, and you can go home and rest. Maybe that's what it is for you. Maybe it's Saturday. I don't know. But I think you need to start thinking about what that rhythm of life is for you. And if you don't have a Saturday or Sunday off to do that, maybe you need to get creative. Maybe you're watching this online during the week. You need to get creative with that. What is one day that you can take to worship and to rest. Those are the two filters for a Sabbath. If you're working 7 days a week, though, you might need to make moves to change something. Because that's the American way. That's not the Christian way. I'm not trying to be ugly there, but you probably need to change something about your life. And maybe there's seasons that we go through, maybe. But man, if that's a regular thing for you, you're in danger, friend. I just want to tell you. Because that's the American dream. You might be fighting for something else other than your relationship with Jesus. You might be trying to get to something else for satisfaction and not Jesus. Because what this does is it says, no. There's no amount of schoolwork that I need to do today. Maybe I should take the C or B. I don't know where you're at on that. Maybe I should take the grade hit because I have to stop and rest. Maybe I should not get the overtime. Maybe I can do without the money because I have to stop. See, that's what we're doing. We're recognizing our limits and we're telling God, I think you can provide for me. I think you're everything I need. It's not the American dream. Man, we got to listen to that, guys. I know it's hard for me too, I'm telling you. We just need to make sure that we pay attention to that. And on the Sabbath, give extra time for prayer. Give time for worship. Sit quietly. Listen to nature if you need to do that. Listen to God's creation. Hike. Play games. Take a nap. Spend some time with friends that you can be yourself around, that you can just rest. Man, get away from the device. That's maybe the hardest thing for us. That is not restful. Playing the game on the device is not restful. Scrolling Facebook or Instagram is not rest. There is some work we have to do here to put the yoke on, right? We have to be intentional here. Say no to those things so that you can say yes to the rest. Say yes to his yoke. It's light. His burden is easy. He wants joy for you. He wants goodness for you. And as I close our time here, if the thought of that isn't appealing, that's a warning sign for you. If you cannot stop, my friend, you probably have some emotional and spiritual unhealth in your life. I think you need to hear that. If you can't stop something for one day, you've got an addiction. Comer says in his book, it's an addiction to hurry. So my encouragement for you is to take that to Jesus right now in the next few moments as we kind of respond during this time. We always have a time to respond through communion, a time to respond and pray and talk to God and be quiet before him. That's what we're doing, by the way. Hey, listen, we don't just do this for a religious activity. We don't just do this for fun because we think we ought to or whatever. We do this so that we can just give just a glimpse of what that Sabbath rest should look like in the moment. Take time, be quiet before God. Get the elements, take them back to your seat. Be quiet before him. Just for a moment. Respond to him and to the gospel. And listen, if you have never given him your burdens, if you've never admitted your limits today, today's the day to do that. Man, we want that for you here at this church. God wants that for you. That's what the gospel is for. That's why Jesus died. Take your burden of sin to him today, and he will receive you with open arms. No strings attached. Man, if you do that today, I would encourage you to come up front after the service and talk to one of our prayer counselors. They would love to pray. They would love nothing more than to pray with you and encourage you in that. And for those of you who are Christians today, I want to encourage you to come up and get your elements here in just a second after I pray. Come up and get them and take them back to your seat. Hold them there. If you're not a Christian, you wouldn't say you believe in Jesus, I would ask that you wouldn't take this with us. But man, even if you're a visitor today and you would say you follow him as the Lord of your life, you are going to go to him for rest this week. Then come up and get these, take them back to your seat, and we'll take them together in just a few minutes. But let me pray. God, we worship you. You are so good to give us this rest, God. Help us to rest in you this week. Break down those walls. God, break down those burdens. Break down the weight that holds us back, God, so that we can run freely. Help us to see, like Christian did in the Pilgrim's Progress, that you just desperately want to take the weight off of us. You swallowed it up in your death for us. God, help us to live in that reality this week. We love you. We praise you. We worship you. You are so good. God, I pray that we, over the next few minutes, will just meditate on that. Sit in that. Just look at the cross like Christian did. Just gaze upon the gospel. Just think about it. Meditate on it. God, we love you. Thank you so much. And if there's somebody here who hasn't put their faith in you, God, or somebody watching or listening online that hasn't put their faith in you, I just pray for them right now that you would help them to just come to you. You have open arms. There is nothing that should hold them back. God, help them to trust you and to run to you right now. It's in Jesus' name we pray, amen. Thanks so much for listening with us today. We hope that it was an encouragement to you. But we don't see this as a replacement for gathering with other believers in a local church context. And so if you don't have a local church, we would encourage you to plug in with one wherever you are. And if you're in Roanoke, Virginia, we'd love to invite you to plug in with us here at Redemption Church. And you're welcome anytime to gather with us. But you can check us out online at our website, redemptionroanoke.com. You can look for other content or resources there. But thanks again for listening.